session of the UCSD Economics Roundtable. And before I introduce today's speaker, let me call your attention to some of our upcoming events. We all know that generative artificial intelligence, AI, is making all kinds of changes in the world. It's in the process of eliminating millions of jobs. And how is the labor market going to adapt to that? University of Michigan professor Betsy Stevenson has served as chief economist for the U.S. Department of Labor and is also on the board of directors of Lyft, the rideshare company. So she knows both ends of how technology affects the labor market. And she's going to be here October 3rd, talking about AI and labor markets. I think that'll be a very interesting event. And did you know that this year, the economics department at UCSD will be 60 years old? And we planned a special event for this fall to look back on what we've accomplished in our first 60 years and where we're heading next. That also will be right here at the Faculty Club on October 25th. So we'll be sending out an invitation on that for everybody who's on our email list, and hope to see some of you there. Now, let me also take this opportunity to thank our steering committee, which helps plan our roundtable series. Isaac Martin, Ed Chufo, Melissa McGrain, Joe Marshall, Terry Moore, Alan Nevin, Don Billings, Gary London, Jeff Lewin, Alex Rojas, and Stephanie Venti. And I also want to thank our co-sponsor, the Department of Urban Studies and Planning, and our corporate sponsor, the CFA Society. Well, we're delighted this year to welcome new table sponsors, GAFCON and Fenimore, and they'll be joining our longtime sponsor, Terry Moore. Also this year, we were pleased to welcome Alex Rojas and Jeff Lewin as individual sponsors. If any of you might be interested in helping to sponsor the Roundtable series, please let me know. And now for today's event. Norm Miller is one of the nation's leading real estate economists. He's previously taught at the University of Georgia, the University of Cincinnati, University of San Diego. He's also very prominent in private sector analysis. For example, he's the head analyst of CoStar, a prominent advisor for the National Apartment Association, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and many others. He told me not to take too long, but I really could take a long time with it. For 15 years, Norm has also joined me and Gary London and several other economists answering an economic question of the week each week for the San Diego Union Tribune. And, you know, many of those questions come down to why is housing so expensive in San Diego and what can we do about it? And I guarantee you, Norm is the guy who can really speak with authority on that. I'm so glad he's joining us today to share the lessons he's learned from a lifetime of studying real estate markets. Please join me in welcoming Norm Miller.
Thanks, Jim. I met one grad student who's here. I don't know if we have any other grad students here, but there's hope for economic students. These guys started off as economic majors: Schwarzenegger, Elway, Mick Jagger, and of course they had successful careers. So there's hope. But thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be here. It's a great setting. I love the campus, although it's so big, I can't find my way around here anymore. I've been here a number of times. I think I talked to the MBA classes a few times and have some friends and colleagues here. Thank you. So a little bit of an overview, what we're going to cover. A few quick discussions about California, affordability, property taxes, a little time on the art of valuation, why it matters, and a couple other topics if we have time, and comments from the experts that we have here in the audience. So this is a question, starting with some general questions that I think a lot of people are asking. Is everyone really leaving California? So I did this a little bit over a year ago, this analysis, and it's fascinating to me. So the tan color is net migration, and if it's down below, that means they're leaving. And the blue is natural population increase. And then I don't know if you can see, we have a whole lot of cities, but we're going to tape this and the slides will be available if you're interested. So one of the things that you can see right away is these cities on the right, or these counties, LA, and some of the other larger expensive markets. They're the bulk of losing California. So when you hear these big numbers about people leaving California, almost all of them are right there. LA Metro and some of the other big markets. And you notice that the average price of the housing from San Diego, which is right in the middle, all the way to the right, is over $1 million, over $1.3 million. Now, on the left side, it's interesting. These are metros in California that are gaining population, both natural and through immigration or migration. And so you see that their average price, with the exception of Santa Barbara, is $580,000. Santa Barbara is the only one gaining, and it's partly because they have some cheaper housing there. And I'll talk about that later on. But to me, this is fascinating. It's fascinating that San Diego is right in the middle. Our average price is just high enough that people want to leave. But we do have some natural population increase as well. So we're right in the middle on the cusp, but it does mean slower population in the future. So when you hear people are leaving California, you say, that's LA. So another topic that we'll hit a couple of times here this morning is affordability. And one of the things, we don't have anybody from the media here, right? I invited Phil from the UT, but he's too busy thinking up the next econometer question. The media never reports even when housing is affordable. So we're getting this more and more of this idea that housing is a social good. And this is in Ireland, where they're, homes for all. And if you think that's restricted to Ireland, this is San Diego. And maybe there's a little bit of Irish there because I see green, I don't know. But you see what gentrification kills. I didn't know that. I mean, wow. So this was only a month ago in the UT, this particular view. But we're getting more and more pressure, viewing housing as a social good. So here's what we know about affordability. And Jim asked me, I could talk about it the whole hour, but I said, you guys know about affordability, and so do people in San Diego, but it's a function of demand, right? And these are the usual suspects on the demand side. And it's always going to be nice here, right? And we know that employment matters. And we have life science, biotech, defense industries, and the blue economy, which is phenomenal for San Diego, but it's one of the reasons we're always unaffordable. We also have tourism, which to me is a negative externality, except for hotel owners and restaurant owners. But these are the reasons, the factors that are important. I wanted to point out one other thing. Interest rates are always mentioned as a big factor. They're extremely important for the bottom 2/3 of the market, especially the bottom third. Those markets are very, very sensitive to interest rates. The upper third of the market, it's not sensitive to interest rates or credit access. Michael Lee used to be a chief economist for Freddie Mac. He's agreeing with me. And the stock market, for the top 10%, it's much more sensitive to the stock market than it is to interest rates and wealth in general. So when we start talking about what affects the market, I need to slice it up. Now, on the supply side, we have the usual suspects as well. And you all know about NIMBYs and regulation and how long it takes to add supply. And right now, interest rates are high. And regulation hasn't changed. and so these are problems that are not going to go away very, very quickly. So here's a recent postcard from California, which you can relate to. But let me point out something about supply and demand. I hear we're building all this housing in the country. especially in Texas and in Florida. Some of you might have read it. Oh, we're building a whole lot of housing in Texas and in Florida. So I have with me today an alumni, Jared Rodeo, and he did this map. And let's see if I can get it to play. So it's playing now. And where you see it in green, we're adding more than enough housing relative to household growth. And where you see it in red, we're not adding enough. And here's what I noticed about this map, that when you go down at the county level, even in states where we're supposedly adding too much, there's places where there's deficiencies and there's places where there's too much. It's a very, very local phenomena, the supply and demand. And when I hear a lot of housing is being built, it's not being built where we need it all the time, and vice versa. So if we drill down on just one spot, Austin, Texas, we added a whole lot of housing there in the last 2 years. And what happened to prices and rents? Just that little spot. They dropped 7.4% in the last 12 months, approximately. Supply matters, right? I know Nathan agrees, Gary agrees, supply matters. And those are markets where we added a lot of supply, both rents and prices drop. Now, by the way, I'm going to focus more on the owner side of the market today. But from my point of view, if you're interested in multifamily, you start with the owner side. And if you understand the owner side, the renter side's the rest of that market. But that's where you start. So supply matters, and you know that in San Diego, that's always going to be a challenge. So how have we historically measured affordability? Well, we lean to this organization, the National Association of Realtors, NAR, and they use median income and median prices, and that's pretty much it. And they factor in interest rates and a 80% loan to value, and then they say, here's how many people can afford the median house. They ignore the other cost, and they ignore starter homes. So let me give you some new perspectives. If we divided it up into 10% tiers, just sliced up the prices, they're using that median one, right? Oops, I just blanked the whole thing out. I know there's a laser pointer on here somewhere. So if you look in the middle where the little arrow, that's the one that they use. Now, this is San Francisco. What do you think if instead we said, let's knock off the top 10% and then look at the average as an example? Something more typical for affordability. That'd be one way of doing it. I think that math might be too complicated for NAR, but it does affect a lot of markets the same way. Here's Los Angeles. Think about if we knocked off the top 10% that's in that median. And what about those other costs? Do they matter? Property taxes and others? So here's the property tax rates in the country for all the CBSAs. And they're all over the place. And can you believe that there's a lot of markets out there that pay 3-4%? If you're paying 4% on a home in New Jersey, you're probably paying more than you are in interest on the mortgage. Now talk about affordability. And then we have analysts out there saying, well, the prices never seem to go up much in New Jersey and Chicago. Here's one of the reasons why. Because their affordability is so constrained by property taxes, which is not even in the measurement that we use. Let me go a little farther with this. This is a more detailed map where you see the darker rust color. That's 3% and above. So you see in Texas, well, they got to get their taxes from somewhere, right? If they don't have income taxes, some of them pay some really high property taxes. And then Illinois, Wisconsin, New York, parts of Michigan, Vermont, New Hampshire, they have huge property tax bills, which are not factored in, but it keeps their prices down. Now, what about insurance? Maybe we should add that in to the affordability calculation. Did you know that the average house in Florida pays more than 4 times as much as the average house in California for property insurance? And you think, well, they should. It's more dangerous down there, right? I mean, we have some fires, but let's drill down on this map a little bit more. And this is almost $7,000. So $7,000, that affects affordability, doesn't it? Here's a little more detailed map by the county level of the insurance rates for property insurance. So what do you see here? We see hurricane territory down there, some fires up in Northern California, tornado territory in the middle, all affecting the property insurance rates. And you see the very bottom of Florida, Miami and near there, they're really high. So even property insurance is not evenly distributed. It's much more expensive down there, as it probably should be. This is also a map for your grandchildren of the parts of Florida that will be underwater by the time they grow up. There's dark areas there. And what about electric rates? Maybe we should add those. Did you know that in Hawaii, they cost twice as much as they do in California? The great thing about high utility rates is that they get payback on solar in about 3 years in Hawaii. We get payback here relatively fast because we're above average. And in Washington, you hardly see any solar because it's so cheap. So we have a lot of variation in electric rates. I think this could be part of the calculation as well. Now, I know you can't read this, but I wondered what would happen if instead of using the median home, we included property taxes and we only looked at the bottom 10% or the 20% of the market. We sliced off and we said, starter homes and just see what the affordability is. Well, what you do see is in some markets like Santa Barbara there, it actually is more affordable, which tells me that up in Santa Barbara, they have some inexpensive housing relative to the rest of California. And, you know, we need some of that. So we shouldn't fix up all of our low quality housing. We need low quality housing in some markets for affordability. We should not encourage fixing them up. Hopefully my economist friends here agree. And I think that was one of the reasons why Santa Barbara still has some net in migration. They still have some housing. It's probably going to be too expensive in 10 years, but right now it's still good. Now, the majority of that country was very affordable in 2017. I saw no reports in any media or newspaper saying housing's affordable right now. We only hear it's unaffordable on the coast or wherever it's unaffordable, but in 90% of the country, it was really affordable. Hardly, you needed 10% of your income or 9% of your median income to buy a home in Youngstown, Ohio. Of course, who wants to live in Gary, Indiana or Youngstown, Ohio? It remains cheap. Of course, these are Rust Belt cities. There's reasons it's cheap, right? There's factors in demand related to the economy or the lack thereof. But it's still cheap in parts of the country we don't report on. So let me drill down just a touch more on property taxes. I divided up the whole country and the effective property tax rate on the left and the average price of the housing on the right with no other controls. So real simple economic model, no other controls. And you see that the higher the property taxes, the lower the average price. Before I said it constrains affordability, but it constrains prices too. And it does. So we see that very clearly here. And then what about Prop 13? What is the average rate that we're paying in San Diego? So the full property tax rate is approximately 1%, right, guys? If you buy a new place. The average paid in San Diego is about 0.64%. That means a lot of people are benefiting from Prop 13. So this is the average rate for 635 neighborhoods that we defined across the country. And here's the distribution. And let me show you what it looks like in terms of how it affects turnover rate. Because if you're paying really low property taxes, you're less likely to sell a home, which could have an impact on prices. And it does. So the effective property tax rate in San Diego County is on the scale on the bottom, and the turnover rate within 10 years is on the y-axis. And what you notice is that the less you pay in property taxes, the less turnover in that neighborhood. And the more you pay, the more turnover that you pay, the more turnover you see. So there's more supply in those markets that are having higher property tax rates. And in the low tax rates, markets like Point Loma, Coronado, Mission Hills, very low turnover. And of course, that also impacts the prices. In fact, the present value, which I've calculated and I've simulated for San Diego, for the average household is about 15 to 20% of their property value. Just as an example, not to pick on my buddies that all benefit from this, but there's a professor friend of mine at Berkeley. He's got a home worth about 15 million. He saves about 120,000 a year in property taxes. The present value of that is huge, and so it of course reduces turnover. And do you remember we tried to change the laws on this, or we did, where you can't pass it on to your heir because it would have gotten worse and worse and worse over time. So we passed Prop 19, and we said you can't pass it on to your heirs anymore, but now you can transfer within the market. So we thought this would free up inventory. We had Art Laffer actually say this is going to free up all kinds of inventory. It did not. Why? I'm asking you. Act like my students for a second. Why? It did not. Yeah.
There's an exemption, pass it on to your children directly.
Well, because you cannot pass it on. Right?
But you still good.
No, you can't anymore. That's what 19 did. It knocked it out. Alex is cooked. Can't pass it on. What's that?
Homes have sentimental value.
Sentimental value. Okay. That's part of it, but that affects everybody, not just the 55 and up. So the answer is capital gains. We're only allowed to exempt $500,000 in capital gains. Now in Youngstown in Ohio, that would buy you the best house in the market. But in California, it's not enough. Every one of my friends sitting at the table, other than Jared, has a capital gains bigger than $500,000. In fact, in this audience, I bet any of you that have owned a home for 10 years or more have a capital gains bigger than $500,000. And so that's a constraint that's really hitting us. There's more than 2 million homes in California that have gains significantly bigger than $500,000. It's going to constrain the market. I don't want to pay that. You know, I can downsize, but should I give up a couple $100,000 to Uncle Sam? Maybe not. Okay, what about indexes? Does that tell you anything? This is the US index, Case-Shiller. Everybody's heard of Case-Shiller, right? Chip Case is gone. Bob Shiller got a Nobel Prize. Good guys. Does that tell you what if I put up the California state Case-Shiller? Would that tell you anything about yourself? Or what if this was the Metro, San Diego? Would that tell you how your home did? So one of the lessons that I've learned over the years is you really got to drill down. And nobody lives in the median house anywhere. So this is a graph of all the neighborhoods in San Diego from 2005 to 2011, when we had the subprime meltdown. You remember that? And all the homes were going down in the country. And where you see the red dots, those neighborhoods went down in value significantly. And where you see the dark blue dots, they actually went up in value, or they stayed the same. And this is, again, this is a 6-year time span. So as an example, you do see some patterns, right? South County versus North County. So my friend over there, Gary, he's over in Point Loma. And during that time, he said, hey, we're not going down in value. And he was right. And Ian was over there as well. You didn't go down in value. And then Cardiff by the Sea, he didn't go down in value, but down in all these other markets, they did. And what was the Case-Shiller for that 6-year period? Minus 35%. So that tells you how much it's skewed by neighborhoods that were devastated in prices and very interest sensitive and credit sensitive. So my point is that if you hear Case-Shiller went up or down, it doesn't mean your home went up or down by that whatsoever. We see some dramatically different results by neighborhood. So now I want to switch gears just a little bit. And I don't have a clock up here, but thank you. I see it now. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about valuation and pricing. And I'll touch upon how many of you have heard of AVMs, automated valuation models? Just a small amount. Okay, so we're going to learn something about appraisal here and price theory. So why is this topic important at all? Well, the reason it's important is because we've had proposals in this country to do risk-based pricing. Risk-based pricing. We've had a proposal called Basel II and now Basel III. And what would these things do? Let me give you an example. I actually had put up the Basel equation, the Basel II equation in my first set of slides, and I realized we don't need quite so much Greek. So let me just give you an example, but it requires banks and lending institutions to consider risk. And how do they use that? Well, they have to keep more reserve, the riskier it is, and they might also charge a higher interest rate. So here's an example. If you have a FICO of 740, a loan-to-value ratio of 70%, you end up having to keep in reserve 0.24% under the proposal of Basel II. Now, if on the other hand, you have a credit score of 620, much lower, a loan-to-value of 95%, more like the subprime days, you have to keep almost 5% capital reserve. So the idea is that you would have more reserve and a higher rate when it's riskier. Now we never passed Basel II. I was pretty upset. I could tell you lots of stories about it. The bank said it was too complicated. But then when we postponed it, you remember Barney Frank? He said, okay, we won't pass Basel II, but we'll do skin in the game, where lenders have to keep 5% of all the loans that they make, which are investments to them. And then we'll align the risk assessment and they'll care about risk. So imagine that, caring about risk. What about risk-based pricing? What about doing that for student loans? If you're a French literature major, the rate's here. If you're an accounting major, the rate's here. Risk-based pricing, what a concept for the market to work. So Basel III has not passed. I don't know. In fact, the politicians right now are saying it's discriminatory against lower credit citizens in this country. Yes, it is. It is. But at the same time, I don't know if it'll pass or not, but the economist would love to see it pass because risk-based pricing would make the market more efficient. And we probably would have never had the subprime mortgage meltdown if we actually had those rules in place, or skin in the game where a bank has to keep part of the loan. So let me drill down on value and valuation, why it's so important. So these are the distributions. On the left are potential buyers, and on the right are potential sellers of any given asset. Could be real estate, or it could be anything. So my buddy over there has got a really old classic Jag. What is it, a J12 or something? XKE. It's in great shape, leaks a little oil, but otherwise good. Now, everybody in this room probably would consider buying it if the price was low enough. So we're all in that distribution over on the left side. We all would pay an amount. Some of us $100, some of us $10,000, some of us more. But Ian might be on the right side somewhere. he's asking so much money that there's no overlap between any of our distributions and his. And that's the way the market works. We have reservation prices that are too low, too high. Where we overlap, that's where we see transactions. So that area that we overlap in, we still have a range of prices for everything, especially heterogeneous goods like real estate. Now, the most probable price is in the middle. So let me drill down and just look at that part of the distribution. That's the most probable price for the more typical sellers and buyers. Now, when I do appraisal for a lender, that's usually what I'm after. Most probable price. They call that fair market value. But notice that real estate's a price dispersed market. There's a big range, always a big range. What kinds of sellers are down there on the low side? Maybe sellers that really need to sell, right? They had a new baby, somebody died, they have to move, there's reasons for it. Job moves. What kinds of buyers are here? Well, they have to move to the city. They have an urgency to buy. Now, what about out-of-towners? Do you think out-of-towners have higher search costs? Yes. Do you think they pay more? Yes. So one question is, do online services like Zillow, Homes.com, providing more and more information, have they made the market more efficient? Well, I've studied this over the years. The premium in 1977 was around 8%. Out-of-town buyers paid that much more than local buyers. It came down to 5.7 in 2005, 2015, 4.54%. So it's been slowly dropping. Now you think that local real estate agents might help dissipate that, but they don't for a variety of reasons. But they are probably getting more information than they used to. Now, who cares about lowering transaction costs and making the markets more efficient? Well, economists and engineers care, right? I don't know if anybody else cares, but economists and engineers want lower transaction costs, more efficient markets. So we care about this and bringing that dispersion in and having more informed markets. So what explains price? Well, it turns out that 80% of the variation in price can be explained with predefined neighborhoods with only 3 variables: location, size, space matters, age, or property condition. And I can explain 80% of the variation. Now, it's true that markets that are more unique, more heterogeneity, are harder to appraise for AVMs, statistical models, and human narrative reports. So if I showed you 2 markets, Escondido and Beverly Hills, what you would see is Beverly Hills is a whole lot harder to appraise in. The homes are much more unique. There's more dispersion. Not only is it going to be hard for the AVMs, but it's going to be hard for the human appraisers using their 3 or 4 comparable properties as well. So keep that in mind. Heterogeneity matters. Now, if I went beyond size, age, and location, I could add a whole lot of variables in: bedrooms, bathrooms, fireplace, air conditioning, roof quality. I can do photo data mining. I can do text mining. I might get up to explaining 88% of the price variation. And then if I add in some nonlinear variables, I might get up to 91%. Now, if this was an econometrics class, we'd go beyond that in terms of other models. But here's a typical model from about 10 years ago. A whole lot of variables on the right that are more detailed, and I can explain in this zip code about 91% of the variation in price. Now, that's a typical hedonic model where we control for size and age squared and bedrooms and bathrooms and so forth. So that's how good we could do back then, and we keep getting better. What else do we need other than physical variables and location? What else would explain that dispersion of bids and ask and that wide range of prices? How about schools? We need that as a variable. Noise, views, flood risk. All that stuff matters. So we can get better and better and better. And the AVMs have been incorporating that into their models. And in fact, the firm that I worked with before ran 11 different models, which I don't have time to go into. But we were getting better and better and better. And some of the stuff that we did, just to show you as an example, here's math scores and prices in San Diego. There's somewhat of a relationship. Schools matter. Here's highway noise, just highway noise. We have a separate thing for airport noise. Noise matters. What about views? Ocean views are better than lake views, which are better than river views. What about water views versus adjacent to the water? Yeah, being off water or water view makes a difference. And this is Newport Beach. What about karaoke sales? How nuanced can we get? So if I use a machine learning AI model, and I use Moody's economy.com data and several other data, and I say Copilot and ChatGPT Plus or one of those, show me how to forecast San Francisco home prices. Well, son of a gun, when you throw in a couple of million variables, something's bound to fit. We call that spurious. Not only that, ChatGPT can smooth out the home prices with a Kalman filter and use a moving average on karaoke. And did you know that karaoke sales in Tokyo lead San Francisco home prices by 3 months? I now have a forecast model. So of course, this is the danger of doing AI, where you're going to get spurious relationships that you say, huh? Do they make sense? And you'll find this. You'll find this if you dig with enough data. So there's a little bit of danger going too far in that direction. What about flood risk? Does that matter? This is a neighborhood in Texas. And that's a guy from Florida. So one of the things we noticed, and I took out a whole bunch of slides, is every time a hurricane hits and we have floods, the market reacts for a little while, takes a couple of years, and we forget. And people move back, or they go down to Florida and they say, oh, this is such a nice waterfront property. You see those home shows on TV? They're looking at these beachfront properties that were flooded 2 years ago, but they're a new buyer and it's nice today. And we are starting to disclose more information, not enough, but this is a home in Del Mar. It was for sale. You guys know where the dog park is? You know the water that comes in? This is at high tide. See the home on the corner there? It was for sale for about 35 million. Okay, I went on homes.com and I looked up the flood risk factor on this home, just wondering. It was 1 out of 10. It means minimal to no risk. Okay, we're not there on market disclosure yet. There are parts of Imperial Beach, parts of Del Mar, parts of PB that probably have a factor above 1 when it's high top. But maybe eventually the market will start to recognize it. Can you read this in the back? Terry, can you read that? For a beautiful moment, yeah, we destroyed the planet, but for a beautiful moment, we created a lot of value for shareholders. Anybody do a Groucho Marx interpretation? Why should I care about future generations? What have they ever done for me? Okay, so running AVMs, what explains price variation beyond all those variables I showed you? There's still things that explain it. Seasonality, which is extreme in some markets. Distress sales, right? Out of town versus in-town buyers, or the price of the market they came from, San Francisco versus Youngstown. How many credits or concessions the seller gave? Who paid for the points? Taste and preferences? I say unobservable for now because we're going to data mine that until we get it. And market conditions beyond credit access. Death and estate sales. Now, personally, I use that as a criteria. If I'm buying an investment property, I look for something that lots of owners, where nobody cares that much. Now, note, from an economist's point of view, people pay different prices for rational reasons, but from a layman's point of view, people overpay, they underpay. So we go back to this. Some people get bargains. Some people overpay compared to the average. That's the layman position. Now, the economist who wants to explain everything as rational might say, well, maybe they're a local buyer that had low search cost and they were looking for 2 years, they saw the bargain and they jumped on it. And maybe this was an Asian buyer that really valued the schools more than anybody else, like Asians do. And they were buying in late June. So peak of the market, they were coming from a high price market. And so it was a rational price for them to pay. But that gives me a big range. Now, if I'm valuing for a lender, don't I want most probable price? Should I ignore that or should I bring that into my model? Because I could bring in type of buyer, the market they're coming from. I could put that in a model. So the price paid now relative to the most probable price is really important for predicting default. If somebody thinks that they have an 80% loan to value, 20% equity home, but they overpaid by 10%, they threw away half their equity. And we saw that a lot in that 2005, 2007 period. So how do we mitigate that risk that somebody might overpay and not have another meltdown? Some might say appraisal, but are appraisals useful at all? See this distribution in green? The red line is the contract price on a home. And when you didn't tell the appraiser what the actual contract price was, and you said, go out and appraise it, that's the range of values that they got. Half below, half above, some way off. Now, what do you think happens when you told the appraiser what the price was? This result below. So when you told them what the price was, 93% of them were at or above the contract price, only 7% below. So they're basically justifying the deal. So a colleague of mine, he talked about this as information loss. That is, you're paying for an appraisal that doesn't stop you from overpaying. That's a nice way of saying useless appraisals. They weren't mitigating risk at all. So the AVMs, unlike the appraisers, are agnostic. They don't care whether they're high or low, and they're going to be about half below and half above. So that is a different way of valuing today that we might see more in the future, but the best thing is that it provides information about uncertainty. I made the mistake of thinking that lenders cared about uncertainty when I was an undergrad working in an appraisal office, and I was providing a point value and an 80% confidence range. I loved statistics back then. And the regulators went nuts providing this large range of uncertainty. But today the AVMs do provide that. Now, one of the things that we do is we rate the AVMs on confidence, and 65 to 70% of them are 80% more or more confident. And so they're being used today more and more for evaluation by lenders. And you remember the meltdown? This is a prospectus from a lender that was one of those meltdowns. So this lender stated that their loan to value ratios were those dark gray lines, bars. They said, we're 80% or below on everything in this mortgage-backed security package that we're selling. When you went and did the AVMs on it, you got the results in this kind of greenish ochre color. In fact, some of the times more than 100%. So what do you think happened to those loans? Well, I could run a log regression and tell you they were 71% more likely to default, or I could show it to you this way, which is a little bit easier. So the loans that appraised out the same were 22% defaulting, and the loans that overstated the value were 38% defaulting. Okay, and we never had Basel II, we never had skin in the game. They had sold these things off to other people and they didn't care. So it matters. Now, one quick note on race and housing. Here's the averages for one lender in the country in terms of what people pay. Did you realize that the average price paid by Asians is way, way above any of the other groups? 674,000 in this portfolio. And this is transactions from 20 to 22. So changed a little bit since then. Whites, Hispanics, and Blacks. Now, which one of these groups do you think the homes are harder to appraise? Turns out it's the lowest price range. Why? They're older homes. Some have been fixed up, some are in disrepair, but they're cheaper. They're much older. There's much more dispersion on quality. And what happens when you think that they're harder to appraise? We'll go back to the AVMs. Half are above and half are below. And if I tell you that lenders make a loan based on the lower of the purchase price or the appraised value, who do you think is going to be penalized by having more appraisal error? Turns out that it's the lowest price group. So articles from some of the studies out there, Brookings and others, say that AVMs discriminate against Blacks. They don't. They're agnostic. There's nothing in there correlated with race. We make sure of that. However, those homes are harder to appraise. There's more error. And when there's error on the low side, that's a problem. So that's what's going on. So we have to be careful with race. So is the market getting more efficient? How's your, oh, yeah, okay, I need to wrap up. Is the market getting more efficient? Maybe. Time when the market's coming down. And here's how many days it takes to sell homes in San Diego from 22 to 23 last year. The mode is 7 days, or was. So if you have a realtor and they sold your home in 10 days, you might think they're great. No, they were average for those that sold, because the home was moving so fast, inventory so low. And by the way, it does take longer to sell homes in higher price markets. Longer in Rancho Santa Fe, quicker in La Mesa. So just for fun, has Trump's brand had an impact on sales prices? What do you think? So this is a Trump Tower in Hawaii where I had enough transactions to run it. And see this chart? That's the average price trend over time. Maybe there's not enough supporters in Hawaii for Trump. I don't know. I'm not making a political statement here. This is just empirical. And then here's that zip code. I said, well, maybe the whole market went down. So here's that zip code, and you can see it went up. Well, the other one, well, the Trump ones went down. I tried to run this for the New York Trump Tower. There weren't enough sales. Nobody there selling. I think it's an illiquid tower. Can we forecast housing prices? A little bit, using market conditions. And I'm going to skip over this and try to wrap it up. Here's our buy-sell signal with market conditions for San Diego, and I just ran this. Where you see, where's the pointer? There's the pointer. The best time to sell a property would have been right around here, 2005. The best time to buy would have been right around here, 2010, when it's going up. Red means don't buy. The ones above means buy. And then you can see since then it's gyrated. So right now we're in a moderate positive outlook as a result of inventory being so low and interest rates being so high. But we are in a situation where we have negative leverage. That is, the interest rate you'll pay on the loan is probably higher than the appreciation rate you're going to get on the next decade compared to the last decade. So it's not as favorable as it was. But I'm going to skip over these. But what we have is a market that's locked in. Somebody said that before, locked in. So the average rate that people have on their existing loans is way below the current rate. We've never had a gap like that. And we can look at it this way. If we can say 97% of those with mortgages are not going to sell unless they have to. And the loan to values have come down, and the amount of all cash transactions, it's 24% in San Diego, but above 3 million, it's over 50% pay all cash. Remember what I said about the stock market? So I can't predict the market a little bit if I use months remaining inventory and interest rates, but I'll skip over that and try to wrap up. And we'll provide that. The conclusion is San Diego is always going to be unaffordable. Why? Great climate, strong economic base, defense, biotech, life science. Thank you, UCSD. The blue economy, not because of tourism. Tourism creates lowest wage jobs. The only people it helps are the hotel owners and the restaurant owners. Otherwise, it's a negative externality. And it seems like we should not be encouraging tourism and then constraining short-term rentals. Those are like opposite policies. If you're going to encourage tourism, you got to have rentals and hotels. You can't do both against each other. And of course, we have an elastic supply. So I know I've probably gone over just a little bit, but maybe we have about 8 minutes for comments and questions. And my colleague tabled over here. All right, Gary, keep it.
So thanks so much for a wonderful talk, Norman. Let me remind everybody, those detailed slides that he didn't get all the way through will all be posted on our webpage by this afternoon, along with a link to the YouTube video. You always find that by Googling UCSD Economics Roundtable. So we have time for a few questions. If I could, let me ask you to raise your hand, and then Jay will bring a microphone, talk in the microphone both so people on Zoom and YouTube can hear. And Gary, I'll let you call on questions.
With some trepidation, we'll let Gary have the mic.
So the conclusion is, as long as I take the entire lessons, no value what?
Exactly. But you have to be able to play heavy metal.
So you spoke to a lot of really interesting things about that presentation. Would you speak to demography and the movement of people in America relative to housing demand, housing prices? I think you sort of left that out. I think that's really interesting. Is San Diego, I sort of describe it as in a sort of climate change Goldilocks zone. Climate change has a lot to do with all of this, but could you speak to whether or not that's going to have an impact, insurance costs and so forth?
Yeah, so as you know, the work from home movement has affected our dispersion. So there's the bid rent curves and the spread out has happened, helping the second tier and the third tier markets relative to the first tier markets. So we know that. So we found that the net migration between metros is a phenomenal predictor of both rental trends in the future and prices in the future. And San Diego's in an interesting spot right in the middle of that California curve, where our prices are so high. Right, by the way, they're over 1.3 million. They've been over 1 million single family since 2020. The UT doesn't know that. They reported it just recently, but they use Case Shiller that includes condos and everything. If you just do single family, the average is over 1.3 million. So the net migration is kind of the key statistic that we've seen that's very, very predictive. And in California and San Diego, I should say, we're at that cusp where we're so unaffordable, but so attractive that we're just barely seeing net positive increases in households here. And actually it dipped a little bit negative with 2022, was it? And it went positive just a little bit 2023, but it's right in the cusp. People are leaving. I mean, it's a personal story for me. My daughter left because of the housing costs, the income taxes, and all the rest of it. So long term, I'd watch migration rates, and this is always going to be an attractive market because, as you said, climate always. So San Diego, unlike other markets, is global. I mean, we have people living in La Jolla. I would say half the residents in La Jolla could live any place that they want, right? But they live here because of the great climate, independent of the cost. So we're always going to have a national global market in that respect, will always be unaffordable. And in terms of supply, you know better than me, but I don't see supply ever becoming elastic here, ever. So, you know, I'm not sure if I've answered your question, but if you were an investor asking, I would say look at the second tier markets and the less expensive markets, and they're going to do better. Yeah, as long as they can get their power grid together, even in Texas, as long as they can have air conditioning, even those markets are going to grow. Yeah, now they do have an oversupply. They're very elastic supply. So from an investment point of view, you got to watch that. If they're adding too many units, you want to stay away. But yeah, Ian?
What do you think of, what's your opinion about the anticipatory effect of proposed legislation? You talked about Basel II and III. Most of the lenders I talk to for construction loans on apartments are behaving as though Basel III has been adopted already. They want to deposit 15 to 30% of any proposed loan they're going to make to me. Then we have Biden and literally a lame duck out there proposing a nationwide 5% annual, rent increase cap.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I mean, Michael might be a better judge. Will Basel III be implemented? It's simpler than Basel II. I know that. Maybe. But then with Basel II, they started this qualified mortgage thing and they kind of watered it on down. So maybe if we have Basel III, they'll water that down as well. If Trump becomes our president, it'll be non-existent or watered down. If Biden or Harris becomes the president, it'll probably stay in place. And in terms of the rent cap, yeah, those things bother me a lot. I get bothered by anything that distorts and constrains the market because I know, just like you know, that in the long run, it hurts supply, it makes rents higher and prices higher. And it's a negative for the next generation. It might help a few people short term, but it hurts us long term. No market with rent caps has made housing more affordable. San Francisco, New York, you look at the markets, it's terrible long term. So I don't know if Basel III will pass, but risk-based pricing, that's my dream before I die, to see risk-based pricing and the market become more efficient and not have another subprime meltdown like we did the last cycle. And skin in the game, I love that too. Should they require you to put too much money down? Apparently they don't know what a stand-up guy you are. They wouldn't require that. Back there in the green. Yeah. It's a blame. Corporate buyers of institutional property and the short-term rentals are being blamed because of deep pockets. They own less than 5%. They own about 3% of the short-term rentals in the US as a whole. So they're very inconsequential. The majority of the owners are people like Terry there that are smaller investors. I'm not saying you're small, but I mean, they're non-institutional players. And so it's really mom and pop owners that own the stock. But the big names, the Blackstone, the BlackRocks, they get blamed. And they're really small. They're small players. So controlling or regulating them would not do anything. And then in San Diego, my big gripe is we're trying to control short-term rentals, constrain that because we want it to be more affordable for other people. I understand that goal, but then we're encouraging tourism, which increases the demand for short-term rentals. Maybe that's where we should back off and not expand the convention center again. So that's my soapbox. I think I've run out of time. Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Norma. Fantastic talk. Hope to see you all here October 3rd for AI and labor markets.
You kept that on schedule? Thank you.